39,000 feet above the frozen wilderness of Siberia, a Boeing 767 is banking to the right. 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees. The lateral channel of the flight management system has silently disengaged. Nobody in the flight deck realizes this. The commander is not seated in his position but standing behind the captain's chair, watching his daughter, 13 years old, occupying the left seat with her hands resting on the control yoke. Hand in the rear observer seat, his son, 16 years old, who just finished his turn at the controls moments earlier. The aircraft continues rolling right. The bank angle increases with no warning, no alert, no indication. Suddenly the nose begins dropping, and the aircraft starts accelerating into a steep dive. G-forces build, pressing everyone into their seats. The commander realizes something has gone catastrophically wrong. "Move! Get out of there," he shouts at his daughter, but she cannot move. The forces pin her to the captain's seat. "I am Captain Paul Henderson. Over more than 2.5 decades of flying commercial aircraft, I have witnessed many things that would disturb passengers if they knew. I have made split-second decisions that determined whether people lived or died. I have recovered from engine failures, fought through severe weather, dealt with medical emergencies at altitude. But nothing in my experience compares to what I am about to share with you today. This is the story of Pacific Western Airlines Flight 7813. It is a story about pride, about a father wanting to share his profession with his children, about a series of small decisions that cascaded into disaster. It is a story that changed aviation regulations worldwide and serves as a permanent reminder that the flight deck is not a place for demonstrations or family bonding. What happened aboard that aircraft on a winter night in 1995 will shock you. It will anger you. It will break your heart. Because at the center of this tragedy were not criminals or terrorists, but a loving father who made a terrible error in judgment, and 2 children who paid the ultimate price for that mistake. Welcome aboard. February 9th, 1995. Vancouver International Airport sits beneath overcast skies, temperatures hovering just above freezing. Light snow has been falling intermittently throughout the day, dusting the runways and taxiways with a thin white layer. At Gate 27 in the International Terminal, Pacific Western Airlines Flight 7813 is preparing for its marathon journey to Tokyo Narita, Japan. 14 hours of flying time, the kind of ultra-long-haul operation that requires multiple flight crew members so they can rotate rest periods during the journey. The aircraft is a Boeing 767-300 extended range, just 3 years old, with 6,200 hours on the airframe. She has completed 1,147 cycles. Her maintenance logbook is clean, showing consistent compliance with all scheduled inspections and service bulletins. Mechanically, this aircraft is in excellent condition. What happens today will have nothing to do with machinery and everything to do with human judgment. 173 passengers are boarding, business travelers heading to meetings in Tokyo, their briefcases already stowed overhead, families beginning vacations, children clutching stuffed animals and coloring books, a group of university students participating in an exchange program, retirees fulfilling a lifelong dream of visiting Japan. They settle into their seats, adjust seatbelts, browse through in-flight entertainment options. 8 flight attendants complete their pre-flight duties in the cabin, counting meals, checking safety equipment, reviewing passenger manifests. Everything is routine, professional, unremarkable. In the flight deck, 3 pilots complete their pre-flight procedures. Captain Michael Chen occupies the left seat. He is 44 years old with 19,000 hours of total flight time. He has been flying the Boeing 767 for 5 years, logging 3,200 hours on type. He is experienced, methodical, respected by his colleagues. His training records show consistently high performance. His most recent proficiency check was completed just 6 weeks ago, with no deficiencies noted. He is exactly the kind of pilot you want in command of a long international flight. First Officer Robert Palmer sits in the right seat. He is 37 years old with 8,000 hours total time, including 1,900 hours on the 767. He has been with Pacific Western for 9 years. His file shows solid performance, good crew coordination skills, competent technical abilities. There are no flags, no incidents, no concerns. The relief pilot who will substitute for Captain Chen during his rest period is David Martinez, 41 years old with 12,000 hours total time, and 2,400 hours on the 767. Martinez is making this trip special for a particular reason. For the first time, he is traveling internationally with his two children, Sarah, 13, and Michael, 16. He is excited to show them Tokyo, to share his world with them, to let them see what their father does for a living. It is a moment of pride for him. But this pride, this desire to impress his children, will lead to decisions that destroy everything. The passengers finish boarding at 6:38 in the evening Pacific time. The main cabin door swings closed. The gate agent disconnects the jet bridge. Captain Chen receives clearance from ramp control to push back. The ground crew connects the pushback tug. The aircraft begins rolling backward away from the terminal, engines still silent. Once clear of the gate area, the tug disconnects. Chen starts both engines. The massive General Electric turbofans spool up to idle power, their deep rumble vibrating through the airframe. All indications are normal. Oil pressure good. Exhaust gas temperatures rising normally. Hydraulic systems functioning. Electrical systems online. The aircraft is ready to fly. Ground control clears them to taxi to runway 08 right. Chen advances the thrust levers slightly. The 767 begins rolling forward, following the blue taxiway edge lights through the gathering darkness. They pass other aircraft preparing for departure. Regional jets bound for Seattle and Portland. Cargo freighters heading to Asian destinations. The tower is busy coordinating the evening departure push, but operations are flowing smoothly despite the light snow. At 7:09, they reach the departure end of runway 08 right. Two aircraft ahead of them in the queue. They wait, running through the before takeoff checklist, reviewing performance calculations, confirming the departure procedure. Everything is methodical, professional, by the book. At 7:17, the tower clears them for takeoff. Chen lines up on the center line, activating the runway turn-off lights to ensure proper alignment. First Officer Palmer reads back the clearance. Pacific Western 7813, cleared for takeoff runway 08 right, fly runway heading, climb and maintain 7,000. Cleared for takeoff 08 right runway heading, 7,000, Pacific Western 7813, Chen confirms. He advances the thrust levers smoothly to the takeoff setting. The engines roar to full power. The aircraft accelerates down the runway, wheels thumping over the center line lights. 80 knots, Palmer calls. Cross-check, Chen responds. V1. They are committed to the takeoff now. Rotate. Chen pulls back on the yoke. The nose lifts gracefully. The main landing gear leaves the pavement. Flight 7813 is airborne, climbing into the dark winter sky above Vancouver. The departure proceeds flawlessly. They follow the published procedure precisely, turning to the assigned heading, climbing steadily through the cloud layers. At 18,000 feet, they break out into clear air, stars visible above, the lights of Vancouver receding behind them. They continue climbing, passing through 25,000 feet, then 30,000, then 35,000. Vancouver Center clears them to their initial cruising altitude of 39,000 feet. The autopilot captures the altitude smoothly. The autothrottle adjusts power to maintain cruise speed. The aircraft levels off, stabilizing in smooth air. Everything is working perfectly. This is the phase where pilots can relax slightly. The demanding work of takeoff and departure is complete. The arrival and approach are hours away. The aircraft is functioning flawlessly, following its programmed route with computer precision. Below them, the darkness of the Pacific Ocean stretches to the horizon. Above, the stars shine with crystalline clarity in the thin air of high altitude. Inside the cabin, passengers settle in for the long flight. Some recline their seats and close their eyes, hoping to sleep through much of the journey. Others open laptops or tablets, catching up on work or watching movies. The flight attendants begin the first meal service, pushing carts down the aisles. It is peaceful, routine, exactly what a long-haul flight should be. In the flight deck, the crew completes the after-takeoff checklist and begins the cruise portion of their duties. They monitor fuel consumption, check weather updates along the route, review the flight plan. Captain Chen and First Officer Palmer chat casually about scheduling, about upcoming trips, about life at home. The atmosphere is relaxed, professional. 4 hours into the flight, they are over the Pacific, roughly halfway between North America and Japan. Captain Chen announces it is time for his scheduled rest period. Long-haul flights require pilots to take breaks, ensuring they remain fresh for the critical phases of approach and landing. Chen unbuckles his harness, stands and heads to the crew rest area in the back of the aircraft, where he can lie down and sleep for a few hours. Relief pilot David Martinez moves forward from the observer seat and settles into the left seat, now assuming the role of pilot in command for this portion of the flight. First Officer Palmer remains in the right seat. Everything is proceeding according to standard procedures. But now Martinez begins thinking about his children, Sarah and Michael, sitting back in the passenger cabin. They have been on this flight for 4 hours, probably bored, probably restless. He is proud of his job, proud of this magnificent machine he flies, proud of the responsibility he carries, and he wants his children to see it, to understand what he does, to share this experience with him. So he makes a decision. He calls a flight attendant on the interphone and asks her to bring his children to the flight deck. Now, before you judge him too harshly, understand the context. This is 1995, 6 years before September 11th. Cockpit visits are not just permitted, they are common. Airlines routinely invite passengers, especially children, to visit the flight deck and meet the pilots. It is considered good public relations, a way to demystify flying and inspire the next generation of aviators. So inviting his children to see the cockpit is not in itself a violation of any rule or regulation. The problem will be what happens next. Sarah and Michael enter the flight deck, their eyes wide with wonder. The instrument panels glow with amber and green lights. Dozens of switches, knobs, and displays surround them. Through the windscreen, they can see nothing but darkness and stars, a view few people ever experience. It must seem like entering a spaceship. Martinez beams with pride. He points out various instruments, explaining what they do in terms his children can understand. He shows them the autopilot panel, the navigation display, the engine instruments. Sarah and Michael are fascinated, asking questions, soaking in every detail. And then Martinez decides to make the experience even more special. At 8 minutes past midnight ship time, he asks Sarah if she would like to sit in the captain's seat and feel what it is like to fly the aircraft. Sarah's face lights up. Of course she wants to try. What 13-year-old would refuse such an offer? But here is where everything starts going wrong. Instead of having First Officer Palmer take over as pilot flying, while Martinez supervises from a standing position, Martinez does something inexcusable. He unbuckles his harness, stands up, and positions himself behind the captain's seat. Sarah climbs into the seat, her feet barely reaching the rudder pedals. Martinez adjusts the seat height for her so she can see better over the instrument panel. Let me be absolutely clear about something. Having children visit the cockpit is fine. Allowing them to sit briefly in a pilot seat while the aircraft is parked at the gate is fine, but what is happening now crosses every line of acceptable behavior. The pilot in command has vacated his seat during flight operations and allowed an untrained, unlicensed person to occupy the active control position. This is not permitted. Not then, not now, not ever, under any circumstances. First Officer Palmer watches this happening. He should object. He should insist that proper procedures be followed, but he says nothing. Perhaps he does not want to embarrass Martinez in front of his children. Perhaps he assumes Martinez knows what he is doing. Perhaps he figures nothing bad can happen with the autopilot engaged. Whatever his reasoning, his silence makes him complicit in what follows. Martinez tells Sarah to place her hands on the control yoke. She does, gripping it tentatively. He then reaches forward and changes the autopilot mode from lateral navigation, which follows the programmed route, to heading select, which simply flies whatever direction he dials into the heading selector. He turns the heading selector about 12 degrees to the left. The autopilot commands a gentle bank to the left about 15 degrees. With Sarah's hands on the yoke, it appears to her that she is actually turning the aircraft, though in reality the autopilot is doing all the work. After the left turn has proceeded for perhaps 30 seconds, Martinez rotates the heading selector back to the right, commanding the aircraft to return to its original course. Once they are approximately back on track, he re-engages lateral navigation mode. The aircraft continues following its programmed route. During this entire maneuver, Sarah simply rests her hands on the yoke without applying any force. She is not actually controlling anything, but she believes she is, and that is the point of the demonstration. Sarah remains in the captain's seat for approximately 9 minutes, chatting with her father, asking questions, enjoying the experience. Then it is Michael's turn. The siblings trade places. Michael is 16, old enough to be seriously interested in aviation as a potential career. He is excited, eager to try what his sister just did. As Michael settles into the seat, First Officer Palmer keys the radio. He contacts Anchorage Center, provides a position report, and informs them they will reach their next waypoint in approximately 7 minutes. Everything seems normal, routine. Martinez prepares to repeat the same demonstration he performed with Sarah. He will let Michael feel like he is flying the aircraft by making small turns, while the autopilot does the actual work. But before Martinez can initiate the maneuver, Michael turns to his father and asks a question that changes everything. "Can I actually turn the yoke myself?" Martinez hesitates for only a moment before answering. "Yes, you can turn it." This is the moment where alarm bells should be screaming in Martinez's head. This is where he should say no, where he should explain that actually manipulating the controls is absolutely forbidden, where he should end this demonstration immediately. But he does not. He wants his son to have an exciting story to tell, wants him to feel the thrill of controlling a massive jet. So he says yes. He reaches forward and changes the autopilot from lateral navigation to heading select mode again. He rotates the heading selector about 12 degrees left, initiating a gentle turn. But this time, Michael is not just resting his hands on the yoke. He is actively turning it, applying significant force. You can see this later in the flight data recorder, the asymmetry between left and right aileron deflection, as he inputs commands that conflict slightly with what the autopilot is trying to do. But for now, this does not affect anything. The autopilot is still in control, overpowering Michael's inputs. After the left turn has proceeded for perhaps 45 seconds, Martinez rotates the heading selector back to the right to bring them back on course. Michael continues turning the yoke to the right, applying even more force now, trying to help the turn. As the aircraft approaches its original heading, the autopilot begins leveling the wings to fly straight. But Michael keeps pressure on the yoke, wanting to continue the right turn. And here is where you need to understand something critical about how the Boeing 767 flight control system works. When the autopilot is engaged in advanced modes, it has full authority to control the aircraft in all 3 axes: pitch, roll, and yaw. A trained pilot knows never to fight the autopilot unless there is an abnormal situation requiring immediate intervention. If the autopilot is not doing what it should, the pilot can override it, and when enough force is applied, the autopilot will disengage, usually with clear warnings. But the 767 has a unique feature. If it senses sustained control input from the pilot that conflicts with its commands, it can partially disengage, surrendering certain channels of control back to the pilot while maintaining others. This is designed to allow smooth transitions from autopilot to manual flight. The problem is that when this happens, the warnings are subtle, easy to miss if you are not paying close attention. As Michael continues applying pressure to turn right, while the autopilot tries to fly straight, the autopilot interprets this as the pilot wanting to take control of the lateral axis, so it disengages only the lateral channel, the part that controls bank angle. But it remains engaged for everything else, controlling pitch and throttle, and critically, when only the lateral channel disengages, there is no loud warning tone, no flashing lights, no obvious indication that something has changed. A trained pilot actively flying the aircraft would feel the change instantly. The control forces would suddenly feel different, but Michael has no training whatsoever. He has no idea what control forces should feel like. And First Officer Palmer, who is loosely following along on his own controls, also does not immediately notice, because he assumes any changes in feel are due to Michael's inputs. The aircraft continues its right turn beyond the point where it should have leveled out. The bank angle slowly increases because there is still pressure being applied to the yoke. There is still no indication in the cockpit that the lateral autopilot has disengaged. And here is the truly damning thing. None of the pilots seems to be properly monitoring the aircraft. Martinez has turned away and is talking to Sarah. First Officer Palmer is looking at his navigation display. Nobody is watching the primary flight instruments that show bank angle and heading. The aircraft continues turning right. The bank angle increases past 20 degrees, past 30 degrees. Then Michael speaks. His voice carries confusion. "Why is it turning so much?" First Officer Palmer looks at him. "Is it turning by itself?" "Yes," Michael replies. Martinez glances at the attitude indicator and sees the bank angle. But instead of recognizing this as an emergency, instead of immediately taking control, he seems puzzled. Why would the aircraft be turning? They did not command such a steep bank. Palmer looks at his navigation display and offers an explanation. We must be approaching a holding pattern. He sounds uncertain. This is a critical misdiagnosis. During Boeing 767 test flights, engineers discovered that when the aircraft deviates from its programmed route with the lateral autopilot disengaged, the navigation display can show spurious course lines, sometimes including what appears to be a holding pattern. So when Palmer sees what looks like a curved path on his display, he assumes the computer is simply showing them a hold that is programmed ahead. But there is no holding pattern. They have not been cleared to hold. What Palmer is seeing is a false indication caused by the aircraft straying from its course while the lateral autopilot is disconnected. And now all three pilots are looking at their navigation displays, trying to figure out this supposed holding pattern, and nobody is monitoring the actual attitude of the aircraft. The bank angle continues increasing. 35 degrees, 40 degrees, 45 degrees. This is well beyond normal autopilot limits. The bank angle warning system should be alerting them, but it remains silent because the system assumes the pilots are intentionally maneuvering. The aircraft passes through 50 degrees of bank. This is a very steep turn, the kind you would only see in aggressive maneuvering or aerobatic flight. The G-forces are building now, pressing everyone in the cockpit into their seats. They are experiencing about 1.4 times normal gravity, 40% heavier than usual. And this increased G-force finally gets their attention. They stop looking at the navigation displays and glance at the primary flight instruments. The first voice to speak is Martinez, and his tone has changed dramatically. Hold it. Hold the controls. Hold it. This command, directed at his son, is probably the worst thing he could say. Michael, having no flight training, interprets hold it to mean hold the yoke steady, maintain his grip. So he does exactly that, keeping pressure on the controls in the position that is causing the problem. First Officer Palmer understands instantly what is happening. He begins inputting opposite control, trying to roll the aircraft back to wings level. But Michael, following his father's direct order, is holding the yoke firmly in the wrong position. Palmer meets resistance. He cannot easily overpower Michael's grip. And here another design feature of the Boeing 767 becomes critically important. Unlike some aircraft where both control yokes are mechanically linked and move together, the 767 uses a system where each pilot's controls can operate somewhat independently under certain conditions. If one set of controls is being held firmly in one position, the other pilot's inputs are less effective. Palmer is trying to roll left, but with Michael holding the yoke, Palmer can only partially command the flight control surfaces. The aircraft is now at 70 degrees of bank, nearly on its side. And remember, the vertical channel of the autopilot is still engaged, still trying to maintain altitude. But at this extreme bank angle, the wings are not producing vertical lift. Most of the lift vector is pointing sideways. To compensate, the autopilot commands nose-up pitch, trying to maintain altitude. This causes the angle of attack to increase. The wings begin approaching their critical angle, and suddenly, without warning, they stall. The aircraft stops flying and starts falling. Interestingly, for the first few seconds of this stall, there is no stall warning horn in the cockpit. The aircraft is definitely buffeting, shaking violently, which is a clear physical indication of stall. But the audible warning is being masked by other alerts, the autopilot disconnect warning and the altitude deviation warning as the aircraft begins descending. It takes about 5 seconds before the stall warning finally sounds. For the next 28 seconds, Martinez, still standing behind the captain's seat, is shouting commands. Level the wings, level the wings! First Officer Palmer is also shouting, bank left, bank left. Let me tell you what should be happening. When your aircraft enters a stall, you must first recover from the stall before you attempt any other maneuvers. This means disconnecting the autopilot, if it is still partially engaged, pushing the nose down to reduce angle of attack, and allow the wings to start flying again and adding power. Only after the wings are producing lift again can you begin rolling back to level flight and recovering to your desired altitude. But this does not happen. The pilots have lost situational awareness. They are reacting, but not correctly. And one major reason they cannot react correctly is that they have received no training for this situation. Pacific Western Airlines, like many carriers at that time, did not provide comprehensive upset recovery training at high altitude. The pilots simply have not practiced this scenario in the simulator. The aircraft is now in a fully developed stall, descending rapidly in a steep right bank. The nose is pointing downward about 30 degrees. The descent rate is increasing alarmingly, passing through 6,000 feet per minute. That is 100 feet every second. At midnight, 14 minutes, things get even worse. With the autopilot finally disconnecting completely, overwhelmed by the forces being applied, the aircraft's angle of attack protection system activates. This system is designed to automatically push the nose down if the angle of attack gets too high, forcing the aircraft out of the stall. It does exactly what it is supposed to do, but the result is terrifying. The nose pitch attitude changes from -30 degrees to -60 degrees. The aircraft is now pointing almost straight down. The descent rate skyrockets to over 20,000 feet per minute. The airspeed increases rapidly, passing 400 knots. At midnight, 15 minutes, First Officer Palmer suddenly exclaims, "There's the ground! There's the ground!" He has recovered his situational awareness. He can see through the windscreen how dire their situation is. They are in a near-vertical dive, the altimeter unwinding at frightening speed. Instinctively, he pulls back hard on his yoke. The G-forces spike dramatically. The flight data recorder shows they experience almost 6 times normal gravity. This is enough to cause structural damage to the aircraft. It also makes it extremely difficult to move inside the cockpit. Martinez is screaming at his son, get out of the seat!" But Michael is completely pinned by the G-forces. He cannot move, he cannot unbuckle, he cannot lift his arms. He is trapped. Palmer, still pulling back hard on the yoke, simultaneously reduces thrust, seeing the airspeed climbing dangerously high. The speed bleeds off rapidly, dropping from 420 knots to barely 200 knots in seconds. During this maneuver, as the aircraft begins pulling out of the dive, the G-forces decrease slightly. Michael finally manages to unbuckle and start moving out of the seat. Martinez begins moving toward his proper position, but as they are trading places in the confined space, someone's foot hits the left rudder pedal. In their current situation, low speed, full aft stick, rolling left with sudden left rudder input, creates the perfect conditions for a spin. The aircraft immediately enters a spin to the right, nose down, rotating rapidly around its vertical axis. They are in a near-vertical descent again, this time spinning. At this point, the G-forces drop to nearly zero, and everyone aboard experiences weightlessness, floating in their seats. Martinez finally reaches the captain's seat. After several rotations, the aircraft stabilizes somewhat. They are in a 30-degree left bank with a 25-degree nose-down attitude. Still bad, but potentially recoverable. If they simply neutralize the controls, let the aircraft gain airspeed, they might be able to recover. But instead, the yoke is pulled fully aft again. The nose pitches up, and the aircraft begins losing airspeed. At midnight, 17 minutes, someone applies left rudder again. This creates the conditions for another spin. The aircraft begins rotating at an increasing rate. They are now below 5,000 feet. Even if they stop the spin, they are too low and too slow to complete a recovery. At midnight, 18 minutes and 42 seconds, barely 3 minutes and 38 seconds, after Michael first sat in the captain's seat, Pacific Western Airlines Flight 7813 impacts the side of a mountain in the coast range of British Columbia. The entire sequence from first indication of a problem to impact lasted only 2 minutes and 49 seconds. All 184 people aboard die instantly as the aircraft disintegrates on impact. The wreckage scatters across the mountainside over an area of more than half a mile. Due to the remote location and severe weather, it takes rescue teams 6 hours to reach the crash site. When they arrive, there is nothing to rescue. No survivors, no intact bodies, just twisted metal and personal belongings scattered across snow-covered rocks. It takes days to recover the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. When investigators listen to the audio and analyze the data, they are stunned by what they discover. Not a mechanical failure, not severe weather, not a terrorist attack, but a series of catastrophically poor decisions by a pilot who wanted to impress his children. The investigation reveals everything. Martinez allowed his daughter, then his son, to occupy the active pilot seat during cruise flight. This alone was an egregious violation of regulations. Martinez vacated his proper position without formally transferring control to the first officer. Michael's inputs to the flight controls caused the lateral autopilot to disengage without clear warning. None of the pilots properly monitored the aircraft's attitude as it rolled into an extreme bank. Their attempts at recovery were uncoordinated and made the situation worse. The lack of upset recovery training meant they did not know the correct procedures. Pacific Western Airlines initially denies that children were in the cockpit, but when the cockpit voice recording is leaked to the media, the truth becomes undeniable. The airline's reputation is destroyed virtually overnight. Within 18 months, Pacific Western ceases operations, absorbed by a larger carrier in a merger that is more about damage control than business strategy. The families of the victims file lawsuits. The settlements total over $800 million. Martinez's family, having lost him along with their 2 children, becomes the target of public fury. They receive death threats. Their home is vandalized. They eventually change their names and relocate to another country to escape the harassment. But beyond the immediate aftermath, this tragedy led to fundamental changes in aviation safety worldwide. First, cockpit access rules were dramatically tightened. While September 11th attacks would later make these rules even more restrictive, Flight 7813 began the push toward limiting non-essential personnel in the flight deck during all phases of flight. Today, allowing untrained individuals to occupy a pilot seat during flight is absolutely forbidden globally. Second, regulations regarding when pilots can leave their assigned seats were clarified and enforced. Pilots must remain in their designated positions during critical phases of flight. If the pilot flying needs to leave for any reason, formal control transfer procedures must be followed. Third, upset recovery training became mandatory. Before this accident, many airlines did not provide comprehensive training on high-altitude stall recovery and unusual attitude recovery. Now, simulator training includes loss of control recovery as a core competency. Pilots practice recognizing the signs of impending loss of control, proper recovery techniques, and how to avoid secondary stalls and spins. Fourth, Boeing made changes to the 767 autopilot system. The investigation emphasized that partial autopilot disconnections needed clearer warnings. Boeing introduced enhanced oral and visual warnings for mode changes and partial disconnections. They also improved bank angle warnings and enhanced other alerting systems. Fifth, the accident highlighted the importance of proper transition training when pilots move between different aircraft types with different automation philosophies. Understanding your aircraft's automation and how it responds to pilot inputs is fundamental. For me personally, this case reinforces something I try never to forget. The flight deck is a workplace, not a playground. It is not a place to show off for family or friends. It is not a place to let your guard down or bend the rules because you think nothing bad will happen. Every time I hear about a pilot who wants to let someone sit in their seat or try the controls, I think of Flight 7813 and those 184 people who died because a father wanted to make his children proud. I understand that desire. As a father myself, I know the urge to share your work with your kids, to let them see what you do, to make them proud of you. But in aviation, some rules are absolute. They are written in blood, as we say, and the rule that untrained people never occupy pilot seats during flight operations is one of those absolute rules. David Martinez was not a bad person. He was not incompetent or reckless in his usual duties. By all accounts, he was a good pilot, a caring father, a decent man. But he made a terrible decision, and that decision cost him everything: his life, his children's lives, and the lives of 175 other innocent people who trusted him to get them safely to their destination. I am Captain Paul Henderson. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult story. I hope it serves as a reminder that in aviation, pride and professionalism cannot coexist when pride leads us to violate fundamental safety principles. The flight deck demands absolute adherence to procedures, constant vigilance, and the wisdom to never ever compromise safety for any reason. Fly safe, respect the rules, and remember that every person who boards your aircraft is trusting you with their life. Until next time, this is Captain Paul Henderson, signing off.